What do you think about war? About the wars still happening right now, somewhere in the world? This one chapter in Korea's history, a war that split a nation in two, might share something in common with the wars of our own time, or it might be something completely different, brutal, tragic, but also full of pride. And sometimes, all you can do is just stop and look back with respect. For me, this was something I kept thinking about the moment I set foot in this country. Do I like war? Of course not. I'm scared of it. But there's a line I really connected with the more I dug into history. It's only when you're afraid of war that you truly understand it. Hey, I'm Nathan, but you can call me Longfair. Right now I'm based in Vietnam, and this time around I'm here in Seoul on a trip that's part work, part travel. On the side, I make everyday vlogs and walking videos exploring cities, just as a hobby. And if you're new here, welcome. Today, I decided to spend the whole day visiting the War Memorial of Korea in Yongsan, Seoul. Before heading out, I stopped by a convenience store to top up my bus card. I suddenly remembered it had run out of money just last night. Being Vietnamese, growing up with stories and history lessons about my own country's wars, I've always had this special curiosity about how war unfolded in other countries, especially countries whose history in some way overlaps with Vietnam's own. Korea is one of them. I'm walking to the bus stop that'll take me to the memorial today. The streets are pretty busy, with everyone heading to work. Sitting there, watching the city slide by through the bus window, I kept wondering what this street looked like 70 years ago. Seoul today is modern, packed, high-rises crowded shoulder to shoulder. It's hard to picture that this place was once a city almost leveled to the ground. The main reason Seoul took such heavy damage is that the city sat in a critical strategic position. It changed hands back and forth 4 times in less than a year. I found myself thinking about how many footsteps had crossed the same road under circumstances completely different from today. Just a different setting, different people. And maybe that's exactly why I'm always curious whenever I set foot in a new place. All right, we've arrived. There's this quiet, solemn atmosphere here. This memorial was built in 1994, not just to look back on the war, but to honor the people who lost their lives for this country. I love days with weather like this, not too harsh. The clouds cut the direct sunlight, and everything just looks softer. It makes moving around so much more comfortable. There are 2 main exhibit areas here, an indoor section and an outdoor section. Equipment used in the Vietnam War is on display here too. The moment I stepped into the grounds, one thing immediately caught my eye. This is the B-52D Stratofortress, and I looked into a bit of its history. It's one of the very few complete B-52s on display outside U.S. soil. In fact, this exact aircraft was one of the workhorses that saw some of the heaviest combat during the Vietnam War. It once served with the 4258 Strategic Wing, stationed at U Tapao Airfield in Thailand. From that base, this very aircraft took off on countless bombing missions over the battlefields of Vietnam. A single B-52D could carry up to 108 conventional bombs, 84 500-pound bombs inside the bomb bay, and 24 more mounted under the wings. Altogether, that's close to 30 tons of bombs in one aircraft. I once heard veterans from both sides of the Vietnam War describe something chilling. During any major battle, the only way soldiers on the ground even knew a B-52 was in the air was the engine's roar. That one distinct sound rolling across the sky was enough to flip the psychology of everyone below. The enemy side felt dread. The Allied side felt relief. Because whenever a B-52 showed up, nothing could stop it. And everywhere it passed just turned into flattened ground. Every B-52D flying missions in Vietnam had its belly painted a dark gray-black to make it harder to spot under anti-aircraft searchlights and enemy night targeting systems. Next up, the Ilyushin T-103, built by the Russian aircraft maker Ilyushin. It was used as a primary trainer for brand-new pilots just starting to learn how to fly. Here's the North American T-28A Trojan, a basic to intermediate flight trainer. This is the Lockheed T-33A, the go-to jet trainer for pilots transitioning from propeller planes to jets. The Cessna T-37C Tweet is another jet trainer that student pilots flew after finishing their basic training on propeller planes. This medium transport aircraft in brown and green camouflage is the Fairchild C-123 Provider. And it was one of the planes that carried the entire weight of resupplying ammunition and food to the Battle of Khe Sanh in Vietnam. And this one, the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II, often just called the Phantom. It's America's legendary supersonic multi-role fighter bomber, and it was the backbone fighter of the U.S. military throughout the Vietnam War and the Cold War. South Korea's Air Force also flew a massive fleet of F-4 Phantom IIs for decades defending its airspace before finally retiring the aircraft for good in mid-2024. This place is way bigger than I imagined. Even though we're right in the middle of a busy city like Seoul, there's this feeling standing in this exact spot, like time just slows down a little. These machines showed up all over the world, but I think most of them came from the major battlegrounds of the Cold War era. This next one is a 40mm 4-barrel naval anti-aircraft gun. During World War II and the Korean War, the U.S. Navy used it everywhere, on aircraft carriers, cruisers, and destroyers, to fight off bombers and kamikaze attacks. Later on, this same gun system was supplied to South Korea's Navy for decades throughout the Cold War. Here's the twin-barrel 40mm L-60K gun, an upgraded version developed by the Republic of Korea Navy based on Sweden's anti-aircraft gun. This was the main weapon that let Korea patrol its coastline and capture or sink a number of North Korean spy boats and infiltration vessels. Here's the Mark 20 twin 20mm anti-aircraft gun built by the Swiss manufacturer Oerlikon. It used to be one of the most common close-range, low-altitude air defense weapons on surface warships. This weapon proved incredibly effective for coastal patrols, intercepting and destroying North Korean spy boats and infiltration craft. By the 1980s, this gun was retired and replaced by the more modern, rotating, multi-barrel 20mm Vulcan system. After sustained firing, the barrel would get seriously hot, so the Mark 20 was designed to let the gun crew swap out an overheated barrel in under 30 seconds right there on the battlefield. All right, now let's move on to the missiles. This is the MIM-23 Hawk, a medium-range surface-to-air missile system built by the American company Raytheon, designed to intercept aircraft and low to medium-altitude targets. And now, this is the MIM-14 Nike Hercules, a long-range, high-altitude surface-to-air missile. It was designed during the Cold War to intercept high-flying, high-speed strategic bombers, some of which could even carry nuclear warheads. Korea's own defense industry actually used the Nike Hercules airframe as the basis for developing the Hyunmoo-1, its very first domestically built ballistic missile back in the late 1970s. This is the MGR-1 Honest John, a ground-launched ballistic rocket system built by the United States. It was the first American ground rocket system capable of carrying a tactical nuclear warhead. This is the K-200 KIF-V, Korea's own national infantry fighting vehicle. Developed in the early 1980s, based on the AIF-V platform, which itself was an upgrade of America's famous M113. The crew and troop compartment together could carry 12 people. This part was actually really cool. I got the chance to climb inside and check it out. These next three armored vehicles all belong to the M113 family of American armored personnel carriers and its variants. They're closely tied to both U.S. military history and to the Republic of Korea's own forces, who fought alongside American troops in Vietnam. The green vehicle with the tiger's head on a blue shield is the well-known emblem of the Capital Division, nicknamed the Fierce Tiger Division. This is the M107, a heavy self-propelled gun with a 175mm barrel. Its nickname was the King of the Battlefield. The vehicle has a massive spade at the rear that gets lowered and driven deep into the ground before firing to keep it steady. This is the XK-9, the prototype version of the famous K-9 Thunder self-propelled howitzer, developed entirely in-house by South Korea. This is the M59, a 155mm field gun, better known by its legendary nickname, Long Tom, built by the United States. Long Tom served as the main long-range artillery for American and Allied forces used to crush enemy gun positions. This is the M167 VADS, or Vulcan Air Defense System. This is a model of the patrol boat PKM-357 of the South Korean Navy. The actual vessel sank and was later salvaged. This ship is tied to a famous piece of history, the Second Battle of Yeonpyeong in 2002. These holes actually punched straight through the ship's thick steel plating. It's honestly terrifying to look at. I'm going to take a moment and step aboard. This replica is built to match the original almost exactly. The real ship, after being salvaged, is now kept at a different naval base. Here's what happened. 2 North Korean patrol boats crossed the northern limit line in the Yellow Sea. When PKM 357 and a companion vessel moved in to issue a warning, North Korea opened fire first, without warning, at close range. The ship took heavy damage and ended up sinking while being towed back to port. 258 bullet and shell holes. That's what this ship took from the North Korean side. It's a haunting recreation of just how brutal that fight was. And this is the full view of the outdoor exhibit at this memorial. This is the 20mm Sea Vulcan gun turret. During that brutal clash in 2002, this gun was firing at full capacity. The Korean sailors manning this turret fought on fiercely, firing back at the North Korean patrol boat right up to their very last rounds before the ship went down. And here's another Vulcan gun turret. This is the main Bofors 40mm gun mounted on the bow. With an effective range of about 2.5 to 3 miles, this was the ship's primary weapon against enemy vessels. This is the inside of the patrol boat's bridge. You can hear sound effects here recreating that combat scene. The ship's captain stood right here, directing fire and commanding his crew as they fought back against the North Korean vessel, until he was hit directly and lost his life right at this spot. These funnel-shaped devices hanging from the ceiling are voice pipes. Even if the ship's entire electrical system got knocked out, the captain could still shout straight into these pipes, sending orders directly down to the engine room or the gun turrets below. Honestly, what's it like for you, standing here looking out at this? Pretty stunning view, right? I'm going to spend a bit of time walking through the tank exhibit now. This area doesn't just display American and Korean tanks. There are also tanks from the socialist bloc here. And most of these models actually served in the Vietnam War or were used to equip Korea's military during the Cold War. This is a Type 59 main battle tank built by China starting in 1958, based on the Soviet Union's famous T-54A design. This particular tank, hull number 931, was actually a war trophy. Korean forces captured it from North Vietnamese troops during the Vietnam War, and later brought it back to Seoul for display. Compared to the original Soviet T-54, these Type 59 versions had some of the more complex electronics stripped out, like night vision sights or gun stabilization systems. That made the tank cheaper to produce and easier to maintain in harsh field conditions. From what I can see, most of its components seem to have been made to meet only the basic requirements of the battlefield. This is the American-made M47 Patton medium tank. The United States developed it quickly in the early 1950s, partly in response to the threat posed by Soviet-designed tanks like the T-34-85. The M47 arrived too late to see combat in the Korean War, but it later became an important part of South Korea's armored forces during the Cold War. For many years, tanks like this formed part of the steel shield protecting South Korea. This is the American-made M4A3E8 Sherman medium tank. It was one of the most advanced and recognizable versions of the legendary M4 Sherman. This particular tank was operated by the Republic of Korea Marine Corps during the Korean War, from 1950 to 1953. And this is a prototype of the K-1 main battle tank. By the late 1970s, South Korea wanted to develop its own tank, partly to counter North Korea's fleet of T-62s. South Korea worked with General Dynamics, the American company involved in developing the legendary M1 Abrams. That's why the K-1 has a low, angular shape that looks a lot like the Abrams. This is the M48A5KW Patton. It was one of the most heavily upgraded versions of the legendary American M48 Patton. It entered service in 1978 and became an important part of the defensive lines north of Seoul. And that brings us to the end of the outdoor exhibition. Now let's head inside. So what do you guys think so far? Personally, I'm honestly amazed by the size of this place and the number of artifacts on display. I know some people might find museums like this a little boring, but as someone who's genuinely fascinated by history, I find all of this incredibly exciting. I also begin to understand what humanity has been through and how the events of the past continue to shape the conflicts happening around us today. Sometimes I think about what this will all look like 50 years from now. Maybe people like me will be walking through museums, trying to understand the historic events that we're living through today. Wow, this place feels unbelievably spacious, doesn't it? It's also pretty quiet today, and honestly, I really like that. It gives me more freedom to walk around, take my time, and capture these images without feeling rushed. What do you guys think? The lower level features several more tanks and artillery pieces. I'm going to start at the bottom and slowly work my way up. This is an M46 Patton medium tank with an incredibly unique tiger face paint scheme. It was part of a psychological warfare effort during the Korean War. And here is another M4A3E8 Sherman medium tank. This is the American-made M1 155mm howitzer. Its main role was to provide high-angle indirect fire. Instead of firing directly at a target, it sent a shell high into the air along a curved path. The shell could then drop onto enemy positions from above. That That made weapons like this especially effective against troops hiding behind mountains, inside trenches, or behind defensive barriers. This is the Soviet-made M30-122mm howitzer. It was designed to provide artillery support at the divisional level. The Soviet Union later supplied large numbers of these howitzers to North Korea, China, Vietnam. They were used in conflicts ranging from the Korean War to the Vietnam War. And this is the legendary Soviet BM-13 Katyusha multiple rocket launcher. It was famously nicknamed Stalin's organ. And now, we'll get into one of the most interesting parts of this video. Let me ask you a question. Can you guess what kind of car was used by North Korea's first leader, Kim Il-sung? Well, here it is. These two black limousines sitting side by side are two of the museum's most fascinating artifacts. They were once connected to the leaders on opposite sides of the Korean War. One was used by South Korean President Syngman Rhee. The other was used by North Korean leader Kim Il-sung. Seeing them displayed side by side creates a powerful contrast. One represents the American sphere of influence, the other represents the Soviet sphere. Together, they reflect the ideological division of the Korean Peninsula during the Cold War. This car is a Cadillac Fleetwood Series 62, once used by South Korean President Syngman Rhee. It was presented to him by United States President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1956. It became the first official bullet-resistant presidential vehicle used by a South Korean leader. And this is the Soviet-built ZIS-110 limousine, once used by North Korean leader Kim Il-sung. It was given to him by Soviet leader Joseph Stalin in 1949. Sometimes I wonder, what would happen if real peace finally returned to this peninsula one day? What if people from North and South Korea could travel freely across the border, with no barrier separating them? What would happen to the government currently ruling the North? A lot of people believe that reunification would automatically bring the regime to an end, but personally, I'm not so sure. There are several reasons why I think the reality would be much more complicated than many people imagine. These are just my own opinions based on what I've learned and observed. The first thing that comes to mind is the loyalty many North Korean citizens may feel toward their leaders. That loyalty has been reinforced over several generations and has become deeply rooted in society. It's not something that could simply disappear overnight. Any major change in the way people think would probably have to happen gradually, especially through education. And realistically, that kind of change could take an entire generation. The second thing is economic development. If real peace were established, it would probably mean that North Korea had decided to open up and build diplomatic and economic relationships with other countries. And if the economy improved, many people might feel grateful to the government for bringing them a better life. They might focus more on earning money, supporting their families, and improving their living conditions, rather than trying to overthrow the entire political system. And a third thing that comes to mind is Vietnam. After international restrictions were gradually lifted and the country opened up its economy, Vietnam went through a very noticeable transformation. Perhaps North Korea could look at Vietnam as one possible example. Again, these are only my personal thoughts. You may see things very differently. So let me know what you think in the comments. Now, this section displays a wide variety of handheld weapons that have been used by the American and South Korean militaries over the years. There are rifles, handguns, grenade launchers, anti-tank weapons, grenades, and many other pieces of equipment. This is the M61 Vulcan. Even though it was developed during the Cold War, the Vulcan remains one of the most iconic aircraft cannons ever created. Some of these weapons were developed domestically from the ground up. Others were upgraded or produced under license in large numbers to meet South Korea's defense needs. This is the KH-179, a 155mm towed howitzer. It was the first 155mm artillery system developed and produced domestically by South Korea. This is the smaller KH-178 howitzer. Although it was technically a successful design, it saw relatively limited use at home, but it was exported to several countries. One of its most notable operators was Indonesia, which used it with mountain infantry and airborne units. Here, we have 4 distinctive combat uniforms representing 4 major branches of the South Korean Armed Forces. On the left is the Marine Corps uniform. And finally, we have the modern Army combat uniform. This display shows the standard personal equipment issued to a modern South Korean Army soldier. You can really see how organized and standardized the military's logistics system is. Everything is included here. From the soldier's personal weapon and combat uniform to everyday supplies and basic necessities. The bags, backpack, rain gear, and accessories all use the same digital camouflage pattern. Emotional message. It compares the value of a single bullet with the value of a container of rice. Oh, wow. And now, we've reached the section about the Vietnam War. Honestly, I'm feeling quite emotional right now. These photographs and artifacts are telling the story of a period of war that my own country had to live through. This is a model of a company tactical base. It was a fortified field position used extensively by South Korean forces during the Vietnam War. The concept was associated with General Chae Myung-shin, the commander of South Korean forces in Vietnam. It was developed in response to the challenges of guerrilla warfare, allowing the unit to remain operational for several days if it became isolated. These are items that South Korean forces captured or recovered during military operations against North Vietnamese units. They include a flag, personal belongings, diaries, documents, and other materials collected from the battlefield. This section presents the history of South Korea's Capital Infantry Division. During the Vietnam War, it became widely known by its nickname, the Tiger Division. It was one of the most prominent South Korean divisions deployed to Vietnam. Growing up, I heard many stories about this division, but their role in Vietnam also remains a complex and sensitive part of history, especially for Vietnamese people. Standing here as a Vietnamese person, I find it difficult to describe exactly how I feel. It places the weapons used by the 2 opposing sides right next to each other. On the left are weapons used by North Vietnamese forces and their proxy troops. This diorama shows an air assault operation carried out by South Korean forces on the battlefield in Vietnam. And right at the center of the operation is the UH-1 Iroquois, better known as the Huey. This next diorama shows the civic action and pacification programs carried out by the South Korean military in central and southern Vietnam. This cutaway model shows an underground tunnel system used by Vietnamese revolutionary forces during the war. The most famous example is the Cu Chi Tunnel Network. This map shows the deployment of South Korean forces in South Vietnam from 1964 to 1973. This map shows the wider deployment of Allied forces throughout South Vietnam. It also lists the countries that provided military, medical, logistical, or financial assistance during the war. And now, we're entering one of the most reflective and meaningful sections of the War Memorial of Korea. This is the exhibition dedicated to the United Nations forces that served during the Korean War. When the Korean War began in June of 1950, the United Nations Security Council passed resolutions calling on member states to assist South Korea. A total of 22 countries provided combat troops or medical support. Each country contributed in its own way. Some sent thousands of soldiers into battle. Others sent doctors, nurses, field hospitals, supplies, transportation, and logistical support. This section introduces the forces of the British Commonwealth. The largest contributions shown here came from the United Kingdom and Australia, followed by Canada and New Zealand. Each brought its own military traditions, uniforms, equipment, and battlefield experience. And here, we have the Netherlands in France. The French battalion earned a strong reputation during several extremely difficult engagements. Two of the best known were the Battle of Yeonpyeong and the fighting at Heartbreak Ridge. Next is the Philippine military. One of its most remembered actions was the Battle of Yeonpyeong in April of 1951. The Turkish brigade developed a reputation for courage, discipline, and determination under extremely difficult battlefield conditions. Thailand also made a significant contribution. Thai troops became known by the nickname Little Tigers because of their determined performance in battle. South Africa and Greece also contributed highly specialized forces. This diorama shows the humanitarian side of the United Nations mission. It represents the civil affairs, humanitarian relief, and reconstruction work carried out during and after the Korean War. And with that, we've now explored all of the main exhibition areas inside the building. So, how are you guys feeling? And I really appreciate the effort South Korea has made to build and maintain this place. It looks like there are a few more exhibits over on this side. Let's go see what they are. This path is beautiful. Yes, freedom is not free. This outdoor section displays several helicopters that served during the Korean War and the Vietnam War. The small yellow helicopter on the left represents one of the early Like helicopters used during the Korean War, the legendary Huey. And this is the Bell AH-1 Cobra. It was the world's first attack helicopter. The United States deployed it to Vietnam in the late 1960s. Today's video has turned out to be pretty long, but I didn't come here just to hear a dry history lesson. I came here because I was curious. I wanted to understand more about the country I'm visiting, understand a little more about the history of my own country. War, no matter where it happens or which generation experiences it, always leaves something behind. Pain, loss, courage, sacrifice, tragedy, and sometimes pride. If you've ever visited a war memorial or military museum, whether it was in Vietnam, South Korea, or anywhere else in the world, I'm really curious to know how you felt at that moment. Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for staying with me and watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.